Have you ever stopped to consider that you might be sleeping every night with an open wound in your soul, and you don't even know it? I'm not speaking poetically here. I'm talking about something real, invisible, and incredibly dangerous that Jesus identified with surgical precision over 2,000 years ago, and most people carry it without ever realizing. Forget everything you think you know about spiritual life. Forget the sermons you've heard, the verses you've memorized, the prayers you've mechanically repeated before bed. What I'm about to show you in this video isn't religious theory. It's not another self-help guru's content with a scripture tacked on at the end. What's here is something completely different, something very few people dare to say out loud because it messes with the deep structures of human existence. There's a trap with no visible bars, no metal chains, no walls you can touch. It's made of something far more subtle, far more resilient than steel. And the most disturbing part, you might be caught in it right now, at this very moment, as you read these words, as you hear this voice. Jesus talked about this trap, not once, not twice. He returned to this theme repeatedly, with different metaphors, different stories, different warnings, as if he knew most people would never grasp it the first time. As if he knew the world would create enough noise to drown out this warning for centuries. And the noise worked. Because today, in the 21st century, with all the technology, all the information, all the access we have, more people than ever are caught in this invisible trap. They wake up tired. They go to sleep with an anguish they can't name. They feel something is wrong but don't know what. They live on autopilot, repeating patterns, carrying burdens they don't even know they're carrying. What you're about to discover in this video will change the way you see every night of your life. Specifically, what happens in the moments before you fall asleep. Because it's precisely then, in that window of time most people waste, that the trap acts with the most intensity. And it's exactly then that the solution Jesus pointed to needs to be applied. You'll understand why your soul might be trapped without you having consciously done anything wrong. You'll understand the invisible mechanism that operates while you sleep. And you'll receive something concrete, something you can do tonight, before you close your eyes, that can start to break this trap from the inside out. But before we get there, I need to show you something that will completely change the foundation of everything you think about this subject. And it starts with a question no one is asking. Think with me for a second. Have you ever wondered why, even after years of seeking spirituality, even after praying, going to church, reading the Bible, many people still feel like something is missing, that the promised peace never truly arrives, that there's a disconnect between who they are and who they should be? That feeling has a name, it has a cause, and it has a way out. And you're about to learn all about it now. Stick with me, because what's coming next is exactly what you've needed to hear for a long time, and maybe you just hadn't found anyone brave enough to tell you. There's something happening to the human soul that has gone unnoticed for entire generations, not because the answers don't exist, but because we live in a world that has trained us to look at everything except inward. A world that has taught us to run, to produce, to consume, to distract ourselves, and never taught us to simply stop and listen to what our own soul is trying to say. This video is about that. It's about waking up to something that has always been there, waiting for you. If you've ever felt like there's something nobody tells you about spiritual life, go ahead and hit that like button now, because this video was made exactly for people like you. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what's coming in the next videos is a direct continuation of everything we're going to explore here. And comment the word SL below if you're ready to truly understand what's happening in your inner life. I want to see how many people came here looking for something real. Let's start from the beginning. Not the religious beginning you already know, but the human, historical, profoundly real beginning, which explains why Jesus' warning is still the most urgent one for any human being living in today's world. For millennia, entire civilizations built their cultures around a central belief, that human beings are made of more than just flesh and bone. The Egyptians called them Ke and Ba, the two parts of the soul that needed to be in harmony for a person to live a full life. The Greeks divided the soul into psyche and pneuma, the vital breath that animated the body and the consciousness that transcended matter. The Hebrews, Jesus' own people, had the concept of nephesh, the complete living being, the soul as the totality of what a person is, not just a spiritual part separate from the body, but the entire integration of everything you are. This wasn't primitive superstition, it was keen observation of the human experience. People from completely different cultures, on continents separated by oceans, without any contact, arrived at the same conclusion. There is a dimension within you that isn't visible, isn't measurable by physical instruments, but is absolutely real and absolutely vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? That's the question ancient traditions answered in different ways, but with a surprising common thread. All of them identified that the human soul could be captured. It could be fragmented. It could be trapped in states of suffering that silently perpetuated, generating devastating consequences in a person's visible life and relationships, health, and the capacity to feel genuine joy. The shamans of indigenous American traditions called it soul loss. Buddhist monks spoke of attachment and illusion that imprisoned consciousness. Medieval Christian mystics described acedia, a state of spiritual paralysis that went far beyond ordinary sadness. And Jesus, with the precision of someone who saw directly into the structure of reality, used the metaphor of an enemy who comes to steal, kill, and destroy not material possessions, but something far more precious. What's extraordinary is that modern science, centuries later, has begun to find physical correlates for what these traditions described. Neuroscience has identified that unprocessed traumas are literally stored in the nervous system, creating automatic response patterns that function like invisible prisons. The brain of someone who has experienced significant trauma operates differently, especially in regions linked to fear, trust, and the capacity to feel pleasure and connection. Researcher Bessel van der Kolk, in his revolutionary work on trauma, demonstrated that the body keeps the score. That unresolved past experiences continue to operate in the nervous system as if they were still happening, generating threat responses in situations that are objectively safe. The person is trapped in a time that has passed, but which the body and soul still experience as present. This also has a spiritual name. Jesus called it slavery. Not the slavery of physical chains, but the slavery of internal patterns that repeat, of wounds that never healed, of lies a person believed about themselves that continue to govern their choices without them realizing it. And here's the historical fact that very few people know, and that changes everything. In the era when Jesus preached, the concept of liberation he presented wasn't just spiritual in the sense we understand today. For first-century Jewish listeners, liberation meant shalom, a word that has no exact equivalent in English. Shalom isn't just peace as the absence of conflict. It's completeness, wholeness, the state of a person who is integrated, healed, full in all dimensions of their being. When Jesus said he had come to set the captives free, the audience immediately understood that he was talking about something that affected the totality of the person, not just the spiritual dimension in some abstract sense, but the concrete, living soul that suffered, that carried weight, that needed real restoration. And the mechanism of this imprisonment, what keeps the soul captured, is exactly what we're going to begin to unveil now. Because without understanding how the trap works, it's impossible to escape it. And the way it works will surprise you in a way you weren't expecting. Because the invisible trap Jesus warned about isn't out there. It's operating in a place much closer, much more intimate than any external force could reach. Prepare yourself, because the next step in this revelation goes against everything the modern world has taught you to believe about who you are and why you act the way you do. Imagine you're carrying a backpack. You put it on your back so early in life that you don't even remember a time without it. Over the years, you've unknowingly been putting things inside this backpack. Every rejection you felt and didn't process. Every time someone told you that you weren't enough. Every betrayal you swallowed without digesting. Every loss you rushed through because the world didn't give you space to truly grieve. Every time you felt invisible, unloved, abandoned, judged, diminished. The backpack got heavy, really heavy, and you learned to walk hunched under its weight so naturally that you forgot what it's like to walk upright. You forgot that there's a version of you that doesn't carry this weight. And the cruelest part of all, you started to believe that this weight was you, that the backpack was part of your body, that taking it off would be impossible or dangerous or irresponsible. This is the trap, and Jesus saw it with a clarity that no psychologist, no philosopher, no spiritual leader in history has managed to describe with such precision and compassion at the same time. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, Jesus says one of the most profound phrases ever uttered. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Take my yoke upon you. An ancient word, almost incomprehensible to modern ears. But it carried an explosive revelation for those who heard it in that context. A yoke, in the agrarian world of the first century, was the wooden implement placed over two oxen so they could work together. But in Jewish rabbinic tradition, yoke had another meaning. It meant teaching, the system of interpreting the law that a rabbi transmitted to his disciples. When a disciple followed a rabbi, it was said that he took on the yoke of that master. In other words, Jesus was saying something radically subversive. He was saying, the system you've been given, the set of beliefs, rules, demands, and obligations you carry as your spiritual identity, that system is destroying you. It's burdening you. And I have something completely different. Something that won't oppress you. Something that will truly set you free. But here's the shocking revelation. Most people who consider themselves Christian today are carrying exactly the wrong yoke. They're carrying a set of rules, of guilt, of religious fears that Jesus came specifically to abolish. And they're confusing this weight with devotion. They think carrying this burden is a sign of faith, when in reality, it's a sign that the trap has worked. The invisible trap isn't sin in the simplistic way you probably learned it. The trap is the wounded identity. It's the set of beliefs about yourself that were installed in you by life, by the world, by people who should have protected you and couldn't, or worse, who actively harmed you. Beliefs like, I'm not worthy of love, something is fundamentally wrong with me, God tolerates me but doesn't truly want me, I need to try harder, be better, do more to earn something. These beliefs operate at the deepest level of consciousness. They're not thoughts you consciously choose. They are filters through which you interpret all of reality. They are the lenses that determine what you see and what you can't see, even when it's right in front of you. And there's a specific moment of the day when these beliefs exert their maximum power. A moment when the conscious mind, which during the day can maintain a facade of control, finally gets tired and lets its guard down. A moment when the trap opens completely and captures what you fed it all day long. This moment is exactly when you're preparing to sleep. When you lie down, when silence arrives, when the day's distractions fade. It's in this space that the soul becomes completely exposed. And it's exactly then that the most important battle of your spiritual life happens, silently, every night, while most people aren't paying any attention. Recent research in sleep neuroscience has revealed something both fascinating and disturbing. The hypnagogic state, that transitional zone between wakefulness and deep sleep, is one of the states of greatest neuroplasticity that exist. In this state, the brain is in a specific frequency of waves that resembles light hypnosis. The critical mind, the rational filter that evaluates and rejects information during the day, is partially deactivated. What does this mean in practice? It means that the thoughts, images, emotions, and beliefs that occupy your mind in the 30 to 40 minutes before you completely fall asleep have privileged access to your subconscious. They enter without passing through critical screening. They are recorded with a much greater intensity than thoughts you have during the day. And during the subsequent hours of sleep, the brain processes and consolidates exactly this material, strengthening the neural pathways that correspond to these beliefs and emotions. Translating into the spiritual language Jesus used, what you sow in the moments before sleep, you reap in the quality of your soul upon waking, and in the quality of your life throughout the days, months, and years. The trap operates precisely in this window of vulnerability, and the solution Jesus pointed to operates in the exact same window, using the same mechanism, but in the opposite direction. But before I show you what to do, I need to show you something even more disturbing about how this trap was built, and why you probably never realized you were inside it. Because what you're about to discover about the origin of this invisible prison will completely change the way you see yourself and how you see the people around you. Are you feeling that this topic is deeper than it first appeared? That something you always considered simple has layers no one ever showed you? If this revelation is resonating with you, if you're feeling that there's something real here that directly touches your life, type the word awaken in the comments. I want to see how many people have reached this point and are truly awake to what's being revealed here. Because what comes next is even deeper, even more precise, and will give you tools you can use tonight, before you close your eyes. Keep watching. To understand the depth of this trap, we need to look at the evidence history has scattered in places we rarely connect. We're not talking about speculation. We're talking about records, patterns, discoveries that converge on the same disturbing conclusion with a consistency that cannot be ignored. Let's start with something that Bible scholars know but rarely teach from the pulpit. The Greek term used in the Gospels to describe the state of people Jesus healed wasn't just physical illness. The Greek word daimonizomai, often translated as demonic possession, carried a much broader spectrum of meaning in the cultural context of the time. It included any state where a person was under the dominion of internal or external forces they didn't consciously control. Compulsive behavioral patterns, cycles of self-destruction, inability to receive love, disproportionate fear reactions. In other words, what Jesus was often treating remarkably resembles what modern psychology calls complex trauma, insecure attachment, and post-traumatic stress disorder. This doesn't diminish the spiritual aspect of what Jesus did. On the contrary, it deepens it, because it suggests that the line between the spiritual and the psychological is much thinner than either discipline likes to admit. And it suggests that Jesus was operating in a dimension of human reality that integrated these two spheres in a way no fragmented approach can replicate. The researcher and theologian Walter Wink, in his trilogy on the powers, developed an analysis that took decades of research to complete. Wink demonstrated that when Paul wrote about principalities and powers, about the forces of darkness in the heavenly realms, he wasn't using empty poetic metaphors. He was describing real systems of power, both spiritual and institutional, that operate invisibly but with absolutely concrete consequences in the lives of individuals and societies. These systems create what Wink called the inner spirituality of institutions, a collective mindset that permeates entire cultures and keeps people trapped in patterns of submission, fear, and dehumanization without them realizing it. The invisible trap, therefore, has a collective dimension beyond the individual. It's not just what was done to you. It's the system of beliefs, values, and structures into which you were born, and which profoundly shapes how you see yourself, how you see God, and how you see what's possible for your life. And here comes one of the most fascinating and least discussed pieces of evidence. Epigenetics studies over the last 2 decades have revealed something that would have sounded completely impossible to 20th century science. Traumas can be genetically transmitted, not as conscious memories, but as stress response patterns encoded in the very DNA. The work of researcher Michael Meany at McGill University demonstrated that adverse experiences alter gene expression in ways that can be inherited by subsequent generations. Children and grandchildren of people who experience severe trauma are born with nervous systems already calibrated for stress, already primed for survival in an environment they perceive as threatening even when it objectively isn't. This resonates impressively with what biblical tradition called generational iniquity, the idea that certain forms of spiritual slavery pass from generation to generation not as arbitrary divine punishment, but as a natural consequence of wounds that were never healed, of patterns that were never broken, of lies that were transmitted as truths from parent to child for centuries. You might be carrying weight that isn't originally yours. You might be caught in a trap that was set even before you were born. And the most liberating part of all is, Jesus knew this, and he came specifically to break exactly these cycles. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, used a specific word to describe the mechanism of spiritual transformation, metamorpho, the same root as metamorphosis. He said that transformation happened through the renewal of the nous, the mind, the way a person perceives and interprets reality. Not through sheer willpower, not through the accumulation of religious effort, but through a fundamental shift in the cognitive and spiritual structure through which a person experiences the world. This is precisely what happens when the trap is broken. It's not that external problems magically disappear. It's that the way you perceive them, and especially the way you perceive yourself within them, changes irreversibly. And that change begins in a specific place, at a specific moment, which is exactly what we still need to explore in depth. But before we get there, there's a side of this story that has been systematically suppressed, and you need to know why. There's a reason why Jesus' deepest teaching on the liberation of the soul rarely shows up in Sunday services, in weekend spiritual retreats, or in the Christian self-help books that sell millions of copies. And that reason isn't accidental. It's not an oversight. It's the result of a deliberate historical process of simplifying and domesticating a teaching that, in its original form, was radically subversive. When Emperor Constantine, in the early 4th century, made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, something fundamental shifted. The movement that had been born on the fringes of society among the poor, slaves, women, and outcasts, which preached a total and radical liberation of the human being from all systems of oppression, had to be adapted to the needs of an imperial power structure. A religion that completely frees people from all forms of internal and external bondage is incompatible with maintaining rigid power hierarchies. The solution was subtle but devastating. Jesus' teaching on liberation was gradually reinterpreted to focus almost exclusively on salvation after death, deferring to a celestial future what Jesus had promised for the earthly present. The phrase from the Gospel of John that says, "The truth will set you free," a promise of real, present transformation, was transformed into a deferred promise, something that would only be fully realized in eternity. The Gnostics, a diverse group of early Christians who took the aspect of inner transformation and liberation of consciousness in Jesus' teachings extremely seriously, were persecuted, their texts destroyed, their memory defamed. When the Nag Hammadi manuscripts were discovered in Egypt in 1945, the world gained access to texts that had been completely suppressed for over 1,600 years. Texts that revealed a dimension of Jesus' teachings on the human soul that official tradition had methodically erased. One of the most fascinating of these texts, the Gospel of Thomas, begins with an explosive declaration. These are the secret words which Jesus the Living One spoke, and which Didymos Judas Thomas wrote down. And he said, "Whoever finds the interpretation of these words will not experience death." The focus isn't physical death and resurrection. It's transformative knowledge, the recognition of who you truly are, which frees the soul from death and life, from dormant existence, from the invisible trap. The most unsettling saying in that gospel is number 70. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This is precisely the mechanism of the trap. What has been repressed, hidden, unprocessed, unintegrated, unhealed within you doesn't just disappear. It operates. It governs. It silently destroys from within, all while the facade of normality is maintained. Theologian Elaine Pagels, a Princeton professor and one of the foremost living experts on early Christianity, spent decades documenting how this suppression process worked. In her book, The Gnostic Gospels, she demonstrates that the choice of which texts would be considered canonical and which would be destroyed was not made based on antiquity or historical authenticity. It was made based on political utility. Texts that reinforced the hierarchical authority of the institutional church were preserved. Texts that taught that each person had direct access to transformation and divine presence without the need for institutional mediation were suppressed. This created a gap that persists to this day. Billions of people who identify as Christian have access to only a fraction of the original teaching, and that fraction was carefully curated to produce institutional dependence instead of personal liberation, to generate fear of hell instead of transformative love, to create obedience instead of awakening. The invisible trap that Jesus warned about, therefore, has a historical and institutional dimension that very few people realize. You might be stuck not just by the wounds of your personal life, but by a belief system that was deliberately constructed over centuries to keep people under control, and which has been so deeply internalized that it seems like the very voice of God within you. But there's something even more urgent, even more immediate, even more personal that needs to be said. And it has to do with what specifically happens on your spiritual journey, in your search for something real, for something that goes beyond ritual and repetition. It has to do with the path back to yourself that Jesus described not as religion, but as life. When Jesus said he came so that people might have life and have it in abundance, the Greek word used for life wasn't biosach, biological life. It was zo, life fully lived, existence in its fullest expression, integrated, awake, free. And what he described as the path to that life wasn't a list of rules to follow. It was a relationship, a transformation, a process of healing that started from the inside out. Christian contemplative traditions, which survived on the fringes of institutional religion, preserved something fundamental that mass religion lost. The Desert Fathers, Egyptian monks of the 4th century who were the first to develop a systematic spiritual psychology, precisely identified the internal patterns that imprison the soul. They called these patterns logismoi, intrusive thoughts that weren't simply thoughts, but forces that colonized the mind and heart and steered a person's life toward destruction. What the Desert Fathers described as logismoia, modern psychology calls cognitive schemas, automatic patterns of thought and interpretation that were formed in early life experiences and operate relatively independently of conscious will. And the spiritual practice they developed to deal with these patterns, the vigilance of the mind, what they called nepsis, or sobriety of consciousness, has striking parallels with the most effective therapeutic practices psychology has discovered in the last 50 years. The tradition of contemplative prayer, specifically the practice of heart prayer that developed on Mount Athos and in the Eastern hesychastic traditions, involved a specific attention to one's internal state during the moments of transition between wakefulness and sleep. The monks who practiced this tradition understood that the quality of attention in these moments was decisive for the process of soul transformation. In other words, what modern science has discovered about neuroplasticity during the hypnagogic state, Christian contemplatives already knew through spiritual experience over 16 centuries ago. The window before sleep is sacred. It's the moment when the trap acts most powerfully, or when liberation advances most deeply. The difference lies in what you do with that moment. And this is where all these lines converge into something concrete, something you can practice, something that can change your spiritual life in a way no Sunday sermon has probably ever offered you. Because what comes next is the part this whole journey has been preparing you to receive. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, now's the time to hit that button down below and ring that notification bell, because what's coming in the next videos picks up exactly where we're landing now, and you won't want to miss this sequence. And before we continue, I need to ask you a direct question. Have you ever suspected that the religion you were taught had gaps, that something important had been left out or hidden, that there was a spiritual depth you rarely found in the religious environments you frequented? Drop a yes or no in the comments below. I really want to know what you're thinking right now. Because what comes next is exactly about how to fill those gaps with something real, something that transforms from the inside out, something Jesus called abundant life, and that's available for you to start experiencing tonight. I want you to pause for a moment, not just mentally, but for real. I want you to take one deep breath right now before you continue reading or listening. Because what comes next isn't just more information to accumulate, it's a mirror. And truly looking into a mirror demands a kind of courage that the modern world rarely asks of us. Think about your spiritual life with radical honesty, not the version you show people, not what you post on social media or what you say when someone asks about your faith. The real version, the one that exists at 3 in the morning when you wake up unable to sleep and your mind starts racing. The one that exists in that uncomfortable silence you quickly fill with your phone, with the TV, with anything to prevent confronting what's inside. What's there? What do you find when the noise stops? Many people discover, in that honest silence, that there's a distance between the God they profess to believe in and the God they truly experience deep in their heart. A God who theoretically loves them unconditionally, but who, in practice, they perceive as a permanent evaluator. A God who in theory offers grace, but whose internal presence never seems entirely satisfied. A God who promised peace, but whose presence rarely produces the rest that was promised. That distance isn't a lack of faith. That distance is the trap at work. It's the difference between the real God and the image of God that was installed in you by people, by institutions, by experiences of rejection that your nervous system registered as absolute truths about the nature of reality. Psychologist and theologian David Benner, in his work on spiritual transformation, makes a distinction that should be taught everywhere people gather to talk about spirituality. He differentiates between belief about God and experience of God. Belief can be impeccably orthodox, it can quote the correct creeds, it can answer any question with theological precision, and at the same time coexist with an internal experience of God that is completely warped by fear, shame, and distance. And the distortion of that internal image is the heart of the trap, because you don't act according to what you intellectually believe, you act according to what you experience as real at the deepest level of your being. If at the deepest level you experience God as a judge who tolerates you with effort, you will live as someone who constantly needs to prove their worth. If you experience divine love as conditional, you will live in permanent vigilance, never truly resting, never feeling completely secure in any relationship. This pattern repeats in all areas of life because the internal image of God functions as the fundamental model of relationship that you apply to everything. With your spouse, with your kids, with your friends, with yourself. The way you believe God sees you is the way you, ultimately, see yourself. And if that image is distorted, everything built upon it carries that distortion. Jesus knew this. That's why the central teaching of his entire life wasn't a doctrine. It was a revelation about the Father's character. The parable of the prodigal son, perhaps the deepest story ever told in any spiritual tradition, isn't about the son who squandered everything and returned. It's about the father who ran. In a first-century Middle Eastern culture, a man of honor never ran. Running was undignified. It was a loss of composure and status. And the father in the story ran. He lifted his robes and ran to embrace his lost son before the son even had time to utter the rehearsed speech of repentance. Jesus was demolishing the distorted image of God with that story. He was saying, "The Father I know doesn't wait for you to arrive with the perfect speech. He doesn't wait for you to prove you deserve to be received. He runs toward you when you are still far off. He celebrates your return with a feast, not with a list of conditions." What does that mean for you tonight? It means the practice Jesus pointed to doesn't start with effort. It starts with receptivity. It starts with a willingness to let yourself be truly loved, which for many people is infinitely harder than any spiritual discipline you can imagine, because receiving real love requires lowering your defenses. It requires stepping out of the character you built to survive. It requires trusting that what's waiting when you become vulnerable isn't judgment, but exactly what that father in the story demonstrated: presence, acceptance, and celebration. What does this mean for you? What is the image of God that dwells deep in your heart? Not the one you learned, the one you actually experience. Because the answer to that question is the map of your trap, and it's the starting point of your liberation. Now let's talk about what you can actually do. What's concrete, practical, applicable. Because everything that's been said so far only has real value if it transforms into something that changes your day, your night, your inner life in a tangible way. The practice I'm going to describe is both ancient and extraordinarily aligned with what the most advanced neuroscience has discovered about transformation. It's not complicated. It doesn't require an hour of perfect silence or a 30-day spiritual retreat. It can be done in the 30 to 40 minutes before you fall asleep, every day, starting tonight. The first element is what contemplatives called an examination of conscience, and what Jesus practiced when he withdrew to pray. It's not a list of sins to feel guilty about. It's a gentle review of your day with the question, where did I disconnect from myself today? At what moment did I act out of fear instead of love? At what moment did I treat myself or someone else with less dignity than they deserved? Not to condemn yourself, but to see with clarity. Seeing is the first step to liberation. What you can't see, you can't heal. The second element is what the Hebrews called tadah, the practice of radical gratitude. Not the performative gratitude of listing good things to feel better. Gratitude as an act of spiritual resistance, the deliberate decision to recognize that even in the midst of difficulty, even when the trap feels strong, there is life, there is presence, there is something sustaining you that is greater than your fears. Positive neuroscience research led by Robert Emmons at the University of California, Davis has demonstrated that the consistent practice of gratitude before sleep measurably and positively alters sleep quality, morning cortisol levels, and overall perception of well-being over weeks. The third element is the most transformative and the least practiced. It's what Paul called the renewal of the nous, and what in contemplative practice is called intentional substitution. Before falling asleep, after the examination and gratitude, you deliberately place a specific truth about who you are in your mind, not a generic self-help affirmation. A truth anchored in your deepest identity, the identity that Jesus affirmed for every person he met. You are loved unconditionally. You are seen completely and accepted completely. You don't need to prove anything to be enough. You already are enough. This truth, repeated in the hypnagogic state, the moment when the critical mind is lowering its guard and the subconscious is most receptive, begins to rewrite the neural pathways that sustain the trap. Not overnight, but with consistency, over weeks and months. Research shows that deep patterns of self-belief change. Neural plasticity is real. The brain literally creates new connections that correspond to the new truths you feed it. The fourth element is prayer as dialogue, not monologue. Most people pray by talking, pouring out requests, worries, thanks. And then they finish, get up, and leave. The dimension that transforms is what happens when you stop talking and settle into receptive silence, not trying to produce spiritual thoughts, just being available, just being present. Trusting that the presence you are seeking is also seeking you, and that in the silence is where the real encounter happens. The fifth element is the intention of surrender. Before finally drifting off to sleep, the practice of consciously letting go of the day. Letting go of worries. Letting go of control. A simple phrase, spoken internally with sincerity, can be extraordinarily powerful. I entrust what I cannot control to the care of a presence that is greater than me. This is not passive resignation. It is the most advanced spiritual act there is, the deliberate transfer of the weight you were not made to carry alone to that which was made to sustain you. Jesus said, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." Don't hold on to anxiety to toss and turn all night. Cast it. It's an act, a decision, a practice that becomes more natural as you repeat it, as you begin to reap the experiential evidence that it works, that there is indeed something or someone who receives what you surrender and doesn't hand the burden back to you the next morning. These 5 elements together: gentle examination, radical gratitude, intentional substitution, receptive silence, and conscious surrender form what could be called a nocturnal liberation ritual. And it's no coincidence that each of these elements finds correspondence in both the oldest Christian contemplative practices and the most recent discoveries in neuroscience and positive psychology. Real truth converges. From different sources, in different eras, the same wisdom emerges because it is responding to the same reality, the reality of how the human soul functions and what it needs to flourish. Start tonight, not tomorrow, not when you have more time or more inclination, today, because the trap operates every night, whether you're paying attention or not, and liberation can also begin every night, with the exact same frequency, at the exact same moment, if you choose to be present for it. You've made it this far, and that says a lot about you. Most people, the folks who started this video, didn't stick around. They gave in to distraction, to the algorithm, to the next piece of content. But you stayed. You listened. You considered. You're different not out of superiority, but out of willingness. Out of a hunger for something real that can't be satisfied by the shallow. Everything we've seen together in this video points in one single direction. The invisible trap Jesus warned about is real, it operates silently, and it has a solution. A solution that starts inside you, tonight, before you close your eyes. If this video struck a true chord in your life, go ahead and hit that like button now. It immensely helps the channel keep bringing content with this kind of depth to more people who are searching for exactly this. Subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell, because what's coming next is directly connected to what we just saw here, and you'll want to be present when it drops. And for those who made it all the way to the end, comment below with the phrase, "I am awake." I want to see the warriors who stuck around, the people with a genuine hunger for something real. This comment also helps me know that this type of content makes a difference for you. And check out the video popping up on your screen right now. It's directly connected to what we just covered, and it will show you the next practical step on this journey of soul liberation. Don't miss it. You won't regret clicking.